Not even a little bit. All right. We are going to be talking about building an API. We have a little bit looked at an API. Who remembers the API that Sarah pulled up when we were looking at JSON and how the internet works web dev did? What was the name of that API and what did it show us?
It was something to do with like NASA, and it was the lunar rover or something like that.
It was NASA's Mars rover, correct. And what did we end up seeing?
A bunch of, or like an array of a bunch of that.
And then when we parsed into that and we threw an image tag on one of those key value pairs, what did we get?
A hash, I think.
Think of a HTML image tag. What did we see?
And we see a bunch of JSON.
Yeah, but we use that JSON to see a bunch of cool Mars photos, y'all. You guys don't remember the cool Mars photos? No, really? So Sarah would parsed into the JSON and then mapped over the JSON using React and then made an application that showed us all of the Mars photos.
Maybe I don't think she got that far.
I feel like that.
I remember like a super long document, and then I remember
cats.
That might have been Charlie.
You guys might want to go back and look at that.
I think it was cats.
Okay, maybe it was fast. Today, we're going to be building out our own API. An API stands for an application program interface. Application program interface can be juxtaposed against something else called a UI. Can anyone tell me what UI stands for?
User interface.
Yeah. Can someone give me an example of a UI that we're using right now? Yeah. Zoom. Zoom has a UI that we're using right now. What part of Zoom is the UI that we're using?
The stuff we click on.
Yeah. And?
The stuff we're seeing.
All the faces. Yeah, all the little boxes with all the people. This is a user interface. And this allows me as a human to interface with this machine, which is my computer, specifically this application called Zoom. But my computer has a bunch of things happening inside of it all the time that I'm not interfacing with. And all of these have some sort of way they can be interfaced with more other programs. And we call those application program interfaces. And one of the notable things about an API is it has none of this stuff right here. It doesn't have a view. It doesn't have a way for a human to look at it and interface with it. So in order to interface with our API, we're going to use another visualizer. In this case, we're going to use something called Postman. If you attended the SD Ruby, you know a little bit about Postman. I used it in my talk. So APIs are everywhere. For instance, the way your keyboard works is your keyboard has little keys. And when you press a button, inside of your computer is an API, which is a program that accepts requests. So every press of your keyboard creates a request with a certain code snippet attached to it, to that API. And that API responds by acknowledging the key input and doing whatever it needs to do with it, putting it in whatever project or whatever UI or whatever you're doing with it then and there. And it figures out what to do with that key input. There's another API you probably use very frequently. Who here has Google Maps on their phone? Who here has Apple Maps on their phone? Who here has Waze on their phone? Who here has Pokemon Go on their phone? Okay, actually I just deleted it, so I don't have it. Never. All of those apps use something to identify your current location. And what is that thing?
GPS.
Google
GPS.
API.
But Google Maps does not have its own GPS, and Apple Maps does not have its own GPS, and Pokemon Go does not have its own GPS. What has the GPS?
iPhone.
Your phone. And and have you ever seen the GPS app on your phone? Have you ever gone in and watched it in real time responding to satellite data? Why not? Or why can't you?
UI.
Doesn't have a UI. What does have a UI is Google Maps. What does have a UI is Apple Maps, Waze, and Pokemon Go. And those UIs are making use of your GPS API. They are all interfacing with your GPS system using the Apple, the Mac OS or iOS GPS API. Lots of acronyms there, right? I for the old iPhone, iPod, OS, operating system, GPS, global positioning system, API, application program interface. Lots of stuff going on there. But as developers, we use acronyms all the time, so I don't have to say the iPhone operating system, global positioning system, application program interface all at once. Okay, so we're going to learn how to make our own API with, with Rails. For heck's sake. Okay, here we go. We are going to be building out an assignment today, or you're going to start an assignment, which you're going to do all throughout PD week, called Wildlife Tracker. But mine, I'm going to use for this demonstration today. Same thing as last time. We have an empty repository when you get started. These are going to be solo projects, just a heads up. This solo, I'm just going to let you guys know right now. We'll talk about the Wildlife Tracker, but this solo project, which you have a week to work on, won't ever be turned in, but it's the primer for everything we do on the second half of the cohort. So the more you do documentation on this project, the easier the rest of the cohort is. Just letting you know. Okay. So I need to do a new Rails application. Let's get out of there and let's go back to desktop. Rails, new. I'm going to call this student API. But it's going to be saved as Wildlife Tracker. So I'm going to be making an API about Learn students. Dropping the SQLite that comes with Rails, adding in PostgreSQL. Dropping the testing environment. I'm going to be adding in RSpec probably. Yes, I'll be adding in RSpec so I can do some RSpec testing. And if you're wondering what I'm working out of today, I'm going to be working out of the syllabus page Rails API. I'm going to keep these instructions right here next to me so you all can know where to find the instructions that I'm following along with. Cool. From there, CD into student. In my case, I could have called it Rails API. I recommend you all call yours Wildlife Tracker when we get there. Just a heads up. Okay, I'm on student API. What's the first thing I need to do when I've CD'd into my Rails application, y'all?
Make a database.
Need to create that database. Cool. I've got my student API development, student API test. From there, I am going to add the remote from GitHub. That just means I only need the git remote add origin command. I don't need any of these other commands. These commands are here to confuse me and throw me off. What does git remote add origin do? Someone from the class.
Remotely adds your project in that repository.
Close. What does a remote do for your TV?
Controls it.
Yeah. How? What does it connect to control it? Connects me to my TV using a remote.
It's a UI.
Yeah, it's a UI. This remote connects my local directory to the GitHub repository using the Git software. So that's why we are adding this remote. All right, now that I've added this remote, if I refresh this page, nothing's still here. What do I need to do with my application before we move on?
Push to main for your initial commit.
You got it. So we do a git add dot. Dot here represents everything in my project. Git commit -m. I'm not going to actually say that I haven't actually checked if it worked. I'm going to check if it works before I move on with anything else. That's just kind of silly. Cool, it works. Good to know. Okay, I'm going to do a checkout. We're going to end up following the same RESTful routes as earlier, but actually just a subset of them. And so I'm going to start off with read students. If I come back here, I have my entire Rails application on my one main branch. Very cool. Let's minimize that. We'll come back to it. All right, made my initial commit. I'm going to be adding in RSpec for testing purposes. Bundle add RSpec Rails. And Rails generate RSpec install. Make sure I run both of those back to back, not using the $signs, which will get in the way. Okay, the generate RSpec install created a new folder called RSpec, created a folder called spec, created a new spec helper and a Rails helper. Love to see it. From there, let's do Rails S again. Just make sure everything is running, nothing broke during this installation process. Load it up, everything is still working. Good to go. From there, open it up in my text editor. Any questions so far? Any questions from the crew who doesn't ask questions when they're confused? Namely Austin and crew. Cool. All right, student API using the wildlife tracker repository. Sorry about the confusion there. API stands for application program interface. Notable facts of an API: no views. You know it's not an API if it has a view. One time I had somebody make a very robust wildlife tracker that had a very robust inputs and Lion King themed views. And I was like, this is amazing. I really appreciate all the work you've done into it. I just need you to do it again and do it correct this time. But I will always remember the Lion King wildlife tracker with the and he's like, but I worked so hard on this. I'm like, yeah, but you didn't follow along with what an API is, and I appreciate you. You can't have a program go and interface with this. I can only have a human do that. So no views. And the reason for that is it's not for humans. It's for what?
For apps.
It's for applications and other programs to interface with. Does that start making a little bit more sense? APIs on the web have a standardized version of transmitting data, and that standard version of transmitting data is JSON. Who can tell me what JSON stands for?
JavaScript object notation.
JavaScript object notation. And who can tell me a weird oddity of JSON? What is the data type of JSON?
It's like a hash, isn't it?
It's a string. Weirdly enough, it's a string that holds a collection of objects and key value pairs inside. Something that's weird about JSON is each key in those key value pairs must be wrapped in double quotes. So this whole thing could look like this. Oh, interesting. Let's get those. Drop you down the line, move you over. We'll do Cody for right now. So this is what a JSON object would look like when it's collapsed down and all together. I'm gonna just give me a second. I'm gonna bring this all together into one string. It would look like this. So how do I know that this is a string data type?
The quotes.
Yeah, because the double quotes and or single quotes if you wanted to. So JSON in this situation, this is how we transmit data on the internet. All of the data that we transmit on the internet is transferred in this format. Everything from Facebook to Meta, everything from Facebook to Instagram to AWS to secret codes, all that kind of stuff. Everything is in the JSON format when it comes to the data structures that we transfer to each other. So this is like payload data. Interesting, huh? APIs also utilize the RESTful routes. Generally speaking, you can make an API without it, maybe a highly specific API, but generally speaking, APIs are going to use RESTful routes. The trick with the RESTful routes is there are 7 of them, right? And 2 of them are used for what?
deleting or updating?
Well, if APIs don't have views,
Oh, okay, so we don't need show or,
we do need show.
I have no idea.
New and edit do specifically what?
They're HTMLs.
They just give us HTML forms. And an API doesn't use HTML because it doesn't have a what?
A view.
Doesn't have a view. Where the job of index is to do what for all of us?
Get all the information in the database.
Yeah, to return a list of everything in the database. And we can do that in JSON format. The job of show is to do what?
Show specific data from the database.
Okay, somebody other than Cody, what's the job of update?
To update a specific item.
I missed one here. What's the job of create?
Generate a new instance.
And what's the job of delete?
Destroy.
It removes the item from the database.
Thank you to whoever corrected me. I appreciate that. Okay, so these are the API RESTful routes. Notably, 2 are omitted. We do not need or want edit or new. And that is because their only job is to render HTML forms. That's it. So today's and this project is going to rely heavily on your RESTful routes knowledge, but a little less heavily than you're probably expecting. And that's because I'm going to teach you a new tool, and I'm going to tell you that this tool is not the only thing like it. Inside of Rails, there is something called Rails Generate Resource. And it does some special work for us. It creates models, controllers, and routes for us, all with the same naming convention. So if I'm making students, I can say Rails G R-E-S-O-U-R, Rails G resource, student, Pascal case, singular, name, string, cohort, string. And it goes and does all of this work for me. Anybody out there a little bit upset at me right now for not showing you this originally? Yeah, I had the same reaction.
Doesn't that create a views file though?
It actually does create a views file. What do we need to go get rid of?
The views file.
Yep. Goodbye. So now I just have the regular views and layouts. But if I go into the controller, check this out. Have my students controller. If I go into my model, I got my student model. And if I go into my config and my routes, I just have this new line. Resources route, resources students. And that line of information has actually built out all of the routes for me ahead of time. So I don't have to build them out.
So could we have done that on our last project?
Totally. But I didn't want you to, because I need you to know what those routes are and how you like what they actually do before you ever use this. Right?
Yeah,
If
so
you,
we
just ever,
could've
if
just
you only
done-
ever just looked at this, you would just be like, yeah, you know, they just get made. But if you use something other than Rails, nothing else will make this for you.
So we could have just done that and then just add the methods, and that would have been fine. And then we
Yes.
would have done the route aliases and been okay.
Yes.
That's
And that's what I'm about to do.
It's not fun to watch you do it. I wanted to do it. I guess.
You're gonna do it. You have this whole project to do it in. But trust me, people who aren't taught what these routes are, then try to build, say something isn't like in a different stack with Mongo or something like that, or Node. Like Node, you'd have to declare every single URL path in its entirety. Like it's not even like Rails. All right, cool. So let's copy that. Let's throw this in our README. Ooh, that is some formatting. Let's try that. That almost worked.
Does Command Shift F work as an auto format?
Nope. Does a find. All right, that looks like it's probably as good as I'm going to get it. Ugh. All right, something like that. That'll work. That command, by the way, was Rails routes. There's other flags you can pass to Rails routes that will make it prettier too. There's like a dash expand. There's even like a dash LL or something like that, or a dash pretty print. For Rails routes, there's a bunch of ways to do that. And resource isn't the only thing out there in the world for Rails that is a cool tool. There's a bunch of interesting Rails tools that exist, but I want you guys to use resource for this project. It will help take steps forward in understanding what's going on. All right. So in our controller, we are going to need some RESTful routes. What are the RESTful routes that we are going to need to use for our API?
Index.
Index.
Show, update, and destroy.
Show.
Create.
Update. Destroy. Create. Strippy. Destroy. Cool. We're going to need to make 5 API routes. And these are not going to be returning to us view files or HTML. What do we want these returning to us?
A string.
JSON.
Specifically JSON. So we're going to take all of the normal returns that they would do, and we're going to have it return JSON instead. So what does that look like? Creating an index method is still just going to be index. And I have a model, which I have not migrated, by the way, which I definitely need to do. I have a model called student, and I have a migration that exists called students. And we need to run this. How do I make my migration work, y'all?
Rails DB migrate.
Cool, we're migrated. Let's check out that schema. Name and cohort, that looks good. Let's add a couple students into here. Name Austin needs to be quotes. Who wants to be in the database right now?
Cliff does.
Eli.
I think I saw Sam's hand get raised. Anyone else? Admittedly, we'll have time here in a minute to add more. I saw Vanessa smile and be like, oh, this is nice. What we're doing is nice. I hope that's what she was thinking. All right, cool. So index, we have that list of students in the database, and I need to get all of them back. How do I create a piece of data, a variable that holds all of the students?
Instance variable.
Not all.
The convention is to use the name of the objects that we're pulling back with plural because we're pulling back multiples. And then to call on the model that we're looking at, or the table that we're looking at, dot all, like Cliff said. Students equals student dot all. Now, what I need to know is how to send this. Oh, come back. Now, what's interesting here is that what did we use the instance variable for?
For all of them?
Yeah, but what's the purpose of using an instance variable?
So you can use it throughout.
The rest of the Rails application, right?
Is it the class?
Specifically in what section?
Just a controller application, right?
Well, where did we call on these instance variables?
Oh, and
We mapped over the array.
the routes, is that what I'm calling them?
How did you guys see what was inside of your database?
In the views.
We called them in the views. In your index file view, you said at blog posts dot map do. The instance variable connected to your views. Do we have views to connect to?
No,
No, why not?
because it's an API, we don't view anything.
Don't need an instance variable. Just need a regular old standard variable. Just be nice and easy. From here, I'm going to use the keyword to send or to distribute or to make available of render. Render is a method that says I have info and I'm handing it off to you. And so when we render something on a screen, we're saying it existed somewhere and we're making it show up or making it real on the screen. When we render something across the internet, we're making it real all over the internet. When I need to render JSON in Rails, I can just say JSON and then I can give it the variable I want rendered as JSON.
Will that not break it with the Ruby magic like in our last one?
How so?
Because remember how when you put render in the controller, it wouldn't work. It's like an implicit thing, like how in the syllabus it said put the render, but every time we did, it was an issue.
What did you actually put render to?
I can't remember what it was on the syllabus.
So that matters more than the fact that you put render.
Oh, okay.
What you actually rendered mattered more than what you put render for. So we're going to render students JSON. Okay, so I have this method. I have my API program that I'm creating. Now we have the question of how in the world do I interact with this thing, right? Insert a new technology for you all to learn called Postman. When you guys are building your capstones, Postman is going to come super handy for doing a bunch of your working with your backend groups or backend teams while the front end team is still building out the views, or whoever is working on the front end tickets we're still building out the views. So Postman works as if it's its own API interactive query. And Postman is this application on the dock of your MacBook Airs. So if you're not on your MacBook Airs, why are you not on your MacBook Airs? You should be. Oh, go to your MacBook Airs and open up Postman. Oh, I bet I still have all my SD Ruby stuff pulled up right now. Yeah, let's get rid of that. Don't save. When you pull up Postman, you might have something that looks like mine. Can everyone see my screen real quick? You see how it says like yours might say, create an account. You can't use Postman without an account. It's a lie. It's a bold-faced lie. You can totally use Postman without an account. Don't make an account. They don't need your info. You're fine. This is a free to use platform. Notice on my screen, I still have sign in and create an account here. It's totally fine. You might have like an overview / scratchpad. You can just get rid of that. This is the basic Postman view on my screen. In the syllabus, if you have questions about working with Postman, there are a number of screenshots that exist talking about the different parts of Postman. I highly recommend utilizing this if you're confused or you need help with anything. It's been super helpful for me during my whole developer journey. After I left my internship, I used this syllabus section for my cohort quite extensively. Okay, when I'm working in Postman, I want to create a new instance of Postman. So I'm going to hit the plus button on the top left. And I think I have dark mode turned on. You might have light mode turned on depending on the settings on your MacBook Air. And I've got a few things kind of happening here. It has a minimum size of screen that it requires that might be familiar. One of them is this word right here on the top left. Anybody recognize this word?
It's a verb.
It's a verb. And if I hit this drop-down menu, what's in here?
More verbs.
More verbs, even verbs we haven't seen before. Like purge and unlock. Oh, those are sketchy. Cool. But there's a few in here that we are familiar with. And then what's this section? What does this look like it belongs to? Or it does?
Request a URL.
Requests a URL. Any guesses on what the URL I'm going to be utilizing today is?
Localhost 3000.
Woo!
Like Andre 3000, but with less tunes. Localhost 3000 slash. Wait, what were those routes again? Oh yeah, get students. So I go back to my Rails routes and I look at what was there and I say, cool, students. And when I'm ready to go, I just hit send. Wait a second, error connect, nothing happened. Any guesses?
Server's not up.
Server's not running.
Server's not running. Even though there's no views attached to it, the server is still going to be serving information. It's still going to be receiving requests and sending back status codes and payloads. And so when I do localhost 3000 students, well, would you look at that? What did we get back?
The
The JSON.
hash of all this stuff.
Yeah, we got an array with all of the students. And look what what's on in front of my keys here, or what's on my keys.
ID.
Specifically double quotes. Kelly got it because we are looking at JSON. Yours might not say JSON at first, it might say text, in which case this is what will show up. That's okay. But if it might say XML, which will show the same thing. It might even say HTML, which this will show up. It might say auto, and auto will just turn it into JSON for you. Very helpful. So that is a very quick introduction to Postman. We're going to use Postman for another couple items. Cool. So I have my index students equals student.all render JSON students. Okay, let's talk about the next one. Show. How do I find an individual in my database?
Student.find.
And then the params ID.
Now, what was the hiccup here when we were doing this by hand? What did I have to go do once I wrote this?
I had to go make a route for it.
I had to go make a route for it, but is Rails already being helpful? Did Rails already make a route for me?
Yeah, because you're high speed resources.
Get students ID. Hell yeah. Uh-oh. 204, no content. Successful, but nothing came back. So it hit something, but nothing was delivered. Can anyone tell me why nothing got delivered back to Postman? Someone other than Cody or Sam.
Because the keys are in quotes, so we can't refer to it as a symbol.
Close. It is making it over as a symbol. It's working. Everything's working. We got the 200 category, so it was successful. Just nothing came back.
We have to render it first.
We have to render it. And render means what? Yeah, to send, to make real. Okay, so what are we rendering specifically? What's the format of our render?
JSON student.
And what are we rendering? What's the data, the code that we're rendering?
The student variable?
Student singular.
The student. Student singular. Look what we got. We got Charlene. Ain't that nifty? Questions?
So
All
are we gonna
right.
be rendered for all of these pretty much?
Say again?
Are we gonna be rendering most of the time while we do like API stuff?
An API just needs JSON, so you have to tell it to send over JSON.
Okay.
That's true not about Rails. That's true about every API that's on the web. Internal APIs within computers, they're going to send over whatever code they're working in. So like Macs send Swift with their APIs, or like C# or whatever they're using. But when you're talking about web and hypertext transfer protocols, you're using JSON. It's the internet standard. All right, but we're not going to render anything with this next one, are we? Because what are we doing with this next one? What's the point?
Make a new instance.
Yeah, somebody said it right. You want to say it louder?
To make a new instance.
Yeah, so let's make a method called create. And create is going to need to take in some information, but we're also going to need to assign that information to a variable. So what's the variable that we're going to use here for making one instance in my student model?
Student.
Cool. And we're going to pass that the model dot create method. And anybody guess what how we're gonna protect ourselves in creating proper data?
Private.
Strong params.
Strong student params. I'm actually gonna close this readme. I'll come back and update it. We're actually running really short on time here.
Is it okay to have it the same variable as in show?
Yes. Why? And
Oh,
it's
well-
okay even with the instance variable. Why? But why is it
Because-
more okay now?
We'll be using a different verb. No, we'll be using get.
'Cause
It's in a
strict-
different method.
It's scoped to do a different method, and something to know is that only one method's active at a time. So even if it was a globally scoped variable, only one method is active at a time. Okay, so we have our strong student params. Just a heads up, I'm putting the word strong in here for your guys' clarification. This is against the convention. There is a convention to not use the word strong here. This is just called strong params. I'm just using it for a teaching guide. Understood? Thumbs ups? Okay. So when you go to an interview, if you put the word strong there, they're gonna be like, hey, what's that about?
Is a convention just to add params at the end then?
Student params, yeah. Okay, so we have our strong student params, which is going to call on the params keyword dot require. And what is the symbol that I'm going to call upon here?
Student.
Student.
Dot permit. What are we looking at?
Name. And cohort.
Cohort.
Good job. Okie day. Let's check this out. So how do we go about creating instances in the database? What kind of requests do we need to send?
We need to get info, don't we?
Not a get.
There's a post.
we need a post to students, which will activate students create method. Look at that controller method over here. Post to students. I can find my HTTP verbs here. And so I'll have a post to students. Now the weird question arises. How in the world do I pass over information from my postman to my API? And the way we do that is by utilizing something called body. When we start using code to do this work that Postman is doing, we're going to have a special key value pair. It'll be called inside of something called headers, called body as well. And body will pass to it some JSON. So we'll end up doing that. But here, it's going to let us just type it in. But not where it says none, not in form data. You don't want to use World Wide Web form. You want to use raw. And this just lets us type into a text field. This student is going to need a couple of things. It's going to need the student, the name, and the cohort as key value pairs that live inside of student. So we already, oh, and I need to know that this is JSON. So once I've done that, I don't need the external quotes. I just make an original object. I just made a few movements. Let me review those movements real quick for y'all. I activated post and the verbs. I found the right URL for my Rails routes. We went to body, which is a place we can type into Postman, and we're using raw to be able to type in whatever we want into Postman. And inside of raw, I selected JSON instead of text. Creating an object, Postman actually helped me out by moving my curly brackets over. I'm creating student, which creates another object. This object has name, who's joining the group, the database. Brooke.
I'll join.
And cohort. Notice just one comma right here between name and cohort, no comma after that. This is it. Okay, post request to students. Remember that table name. Sending over a JSON object, JSON, which is an object with the student key value pair and a JSON object, and an object nested inside of that with name and cohort as key value pairs, name being Brooke, cohort being Echo 2022. Let's see if I did it right. 422, unprocessable entity. Very interesting. Let's look at this. Preview. Action controller, invalid authenticity token in students controller create. Wow, isn't this cool? It's doing like this whole like Railsy thing. This is crazy. Action controller, invalid authenticity token. Well, it's actually pretty helpful because I know where this lives. Action controller. Can anyone point to where this lives? Application controller is a child of action controller. And what's it saying as my error? Invalid authenticity token. Can't verify CRSF token authenticity. Something for you all to know is that Rails is got a lot of built-in security protocols. And one of them is Rails doesn't let people just make queries to your application as they want. They're not allowed to do that. That's a huge security issue. If people can just ask for all your credit cards. What you have to do while we're in development is you have to disable that security protocol. And the way we disable that security protocol is to say skip the before action. The before action is a whole series of protocols and things that are happening in Rails before it lets you do certain things like add data to your database. And one of those things is called the verify authenticity token. I don't actually need to remember how to spell this perfectly. It's in here. It's in your syllabus. I'm going to find it real quick. I'm going to find it really quick. I hope. There it is. Oh, I put the colon on the wrong side. Nope. Copy the wrong thing. Grab that. The skip before action verify authenticity token. Hey, disable all those security protocols you got going on. I'm just working on my local computer, man. (204) no content. All right. Maybe it worked. I guess I just won't know unless I do a get. Hey, there's Brooke. Pretty cool, huh? Would be cooler if it let me know that Brooke worked out, right? So just like we did with the last create, let's just do a quick if. Student.valid. Render the student, else render a status code of 422 unprocessable entity. Rails might actually do that on its own. I'm just adding that in there for my own personal flair. All right, let's try this again. Let's post another student. Who else wants to join? Catherine. Post request. JSON object, JSON, inside of raw, inside of body, student with double quotes, name with double quotes, 1 comma, name, cohort with double quotes, string, looks good, let's do it. Hey, 200 okay, and we got a response of Catherine. Look at that. You want to see the other option, the 422? Oh no, it works. It took that in as a string. All right, that's great. Let's do empty. That was a bad request, not an unprocessable entity. What would be here? Oh, I know what we need to do. Let's go to our model. Validates. Did length have a colon after it? You guys remember this?
I think it does.
Minimum 2. Let's actually put cohort.
Why didn't we have to do the validates earlier when we did .valid?
So the .valid was checking multiple things. One of the things it also checks is validations. And so I'm just gonna put in here minimum length 5 for that one.
Do you need colons in front of cohort?
I do need colons in front of cohort. Thank you. All right, let's bring this person back and we'll just get rid of all this other than etch. Ooh, 500 internal server error. What did we do wrong? Post to students. Missing templates. Did you mean layouts, application, Rails? Maybe I have this syntax off right here. All
Are
right.
you missing the presence?
No, I'm looking for length. Let's go back to the validations really quick. Email length minimum 10. Length minimum 5. All right, well, whatever. 422 is not going to activate right now. That's okay. We're really pressed for time. Okay, sorry about that tangent there, y'all. But we are successfully getting things from our database. I can do another GET request to students. I can see our student named 1 and our student named Catherine. So create destroy is in the syllabus right here. So there's a bit of a walkthrough for destroy and a walkthrough for update, just a heads up. All right, I'm going to stop this so we can start talking about our week-long project that we got coming up.